My name is Andrew Wynne-Williams, and I'm the Divisional Vice President for CME for the British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. So welcome to this session. I'm delighted to have so many people on board with us today. The session will be recorded for those of you who missed that, and the recording will be available to those who request it. We'll make sure that when we put out our post-event survey, we'll note that in the post-event survey. We've decided to put on this session because we've had a number of members that have had cybersecurity incidents to one degree or another, and those are just the ones we know about. We know a lot of people will face those kinds of issues and try and keep it confidential. So we thought it was becoming more and more an issue, and so we'd like to thank those panelists who have joined us. I should probably clarify that we asked the panelists to participate, and then once they all agreed, I only then sprang onto them that we wanted them to speak for 15 minutes before an hour of questions at the end. So I figured so that I'm at least one panelist is a little bit unhappy with me as a result of that. But so you're not here to listen to me, so we're going to get going right away, and we're going to have four panelists. I'm just going to introduce you briefly to all four of them first before we circle back to our first panelist. All of our materials were distributed prior to the session, so you should have the bios for the panelists. So I'm not actually going to read the bios. I'm just going to do a kind of a quick introduction. I'm going to start with Kenzie Nix. So I know Kenzie from our Automation Robotics Council. I've been really impressed with her expertise on this issue, and I specifically asked her to participate on this panel as a result of getting to know her. So she joined SCS Manufacturing and our Automation Robotics Council in 2022. She spent 6 years in the mining industry, and her experience involves primarily working with end-to-end network infrastructure and design. So our second panelist will be Mike Nunn. He's the CEO of TLC Solutions. We asked Mike to come because he delivers business technology solutions that drive profits. And he's worked a lot with small businesses. But we also wanted Mike here because Mike has spent more than 20 years in the manufacturing industry before switching to the IT space. So he's got a really good cross-sectoral knowledge and an understanding of the manufacturing industry in terms of what cybersecurity should mean and could mean. Our third panelist is Dr. Christoph Seelman. We wanted him because he's also got more than 20 years technical experience in software development, networking, manufacturing automation, and critical infrastructure in both industry and academia. So again, one of those people with a lot of cross-sectoral knowledge that he can put on the table. And finally, we'll have Sean Graham. Sean Graham is from Acera Insurance. We think that just talking about the technical aspects of this without kind of getting into the potential pitfalls of consequences outside of the technical aspects is really important. And so Sean is got kind of a wealth of experience in safeguarding assets and data. He joined Acera about 10 years ago, specifically to build an executive line of practice, and has built one of the most formidable reputations in Canada for protecting a diverse array of valuables. So from that, I'm going to now circle back to Kenzie and put Kenzie onto the table. So thank you very much, Kenzie. You are up.
Just let me know when you guys can see my screen.
We can see everything. Go to it.
Perfect. Okay, so like Andrew said, I have just moved over to the manufacturing industry. I have previously spent a lot of years in mining, right from base level, doing bringing a logic analyzer onto the equipment and reverse engineering the signals off the engines, to data ingestion in the cloud side. It's kind of a wide arrangement of experience, I guess, in that industry. And so what I'm going to talk about today is kind of two different approaches, so of network segmentation. So I'm going to first go through what the ideal state is, like if you are perfect, what that looks like, and then kind of best practices where most people will kind of sit in, and what you should, as a company, what we all should kind of strive for segmenting our network, and where that kind of sits. So first, this is a base level. This is the Purdue reference model, network model. There's a lot of models that are very, very similar to this. You kind of have different layers of your network so that if there is an attack, they can only stay in that zone. For in manufacturing, where if we start at the bottom level, the level 0, that's where your actuators, sensors, kind of, if you think about it, anything that moves or is watching, you want that to be your most protected layer of your network. Moving up from there is your controllers. So your PLCs, if you have any Arduinos, Raspberry Pis running anything, having them at that level, which is just one more access. So if I was going to access a sensor, I would have to go through my PLC to get to that sensor level. And then you have your jump servers. Jump servers are great for accessing robotics. They're great for accessing any of your HMI dashboards, any of your robotic controls. And if you are looking, I know a lot of us, definitely in the robotics council that I've talked to, a lot of us have OEMs come in and are looking at our robotics. From, if there's an issue, we call them and they say, okay, let us in, and you go in. So having that jump server there, where you can whitelist certain OEMs that can come in, just a base level, because Andrew learned this term earlier. So whitelisting, you can basically, if you think of it as a Swiss cheese with a gatekeeper at the access level. Whitelisting is giving that gatekeeper permission to let that link or control through into the next layer. So having your OEMs being whitelisted at this layer is super beneficial, and not just giving them total access, your robotics total access to the outside world. Your operations system, that's where your main workers are going to kind of sit. So where your automation technicians, your electricians, having their computers that connect into those robotic systems, you want to have them here with some sort of logging that happens on this. I laugh with our IT guys about this layer. Is when I do something, if I'm shutting something down remotely, anything that could cause a logging incident, I always let them know right away, hey, it is me. You don't have to worry that there's something going on here. So having some form of logging from that level 3 downwards is awesome. Logging at every level is great, but especially at that level when you're kind of starting the interface into your physical systems. Your next level up is having your patch servers. So doing Windows patching, where that actually comes through, the accepted patches. You want to have that at this level, as well as any of your backup servers. And then your final layer, I can't see it, I'm hoping you guys can see this, is where your main kind of outside world connections can come in. Like I said, this is dream state. If everybody could go here, that is awesome. And having logging at each one of these layers where these firewalls sit, is your absolute dream state. You want to be here. You want to strive to be here in your company. Most companies will not get here, and Sean might correct me later, but this is kind of where you want to be, and really segmenting the different areas to how your different systems interact and where they interact and where they're allowed to interact. So next one, this is what we should all try and get to. So having 3 different points of logging and firewalls. This is a way more simplified version where you have your robotics and sensors control systems on one side. That's on the edge to your far left of your screen. In the middle, having your data analytics, any APIs, have them sitting there, your scripts sitting there where they can interface with the outside world, but also to your robotic systems. And then on the far right-hand side, just your enterprise. So no way from the enterprise to the edge without going through a server on the platform component. So this is where hopefully all companies this is an achievable state and where most companies should try and get to. It's a lot more simplified than the version that I showed previously, but it still breaks that into different areas so that if you are compromised, that compromise is only stuck in one area. So yeah, this is kind of very, very simplified basic version of network and where you should go and try and stay within. And yeah. Andrew, are we doing all questions at the end? You're muted.
Yes, we'll do questions at the end.
Okay.
So, but I just, for clarity on this is you're really saying that you've got to make sure that your machinery is cut off as much as possible from the outside world.
Yeah, and one of the big things that people don't really look at is, like I mentioned earlier, with the OEMs. So for most, like if your saw or your plasma machine, if something goes wrong, you call up the OEM and say, hey, this is going on. Their access to your machine, that is through the internet. So if it has direct access, if your OEMs have direct access, that means that your system has direct open access to the interweb unless you have some logging or whitelisting going on through your network, which is just a open open platform for an attack.
So essentially you're saying that when you're whitelisting, or when you're providing access to your machinery to your OEMs, you got to make sure that that's cut off from the rest of your systems so that access can't be used as an attack.
Yeah, and just making sure that your OEM is the only thing that has access to that level if you are having OEM access, and making sure that there's logging going on so not anything can come through, just the accounts that you are allowing to get through.
Perfect. Thanks, Kenzie. That's good. All right, so before we're gonna move on now to Mike Nunn. So Mike, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Get the share going here. Everybody can see that okay, I imagine. So I'll dive right in. So great presentation, Kenzie. Thank you. I'm actually going to touch on that very briefly. You presented that very well, so thank you for doing that. It's a key point for manufacturers. I'm going to talk about some best practices. There's many layers to cybersecurity for business, both on the user side, the staff side, and on the company side. There's no way I can touch on all of that in 15 minutes. Absolutely no way. So I'm going to pick one that everybody is familiar with, and then I'll have some shares at the end. So some best practices. The best place to start, just the facts. These are only some facts. Cybersecurity crime is on the rise. Everybody knows it. Everybody sees it. It's in the news. We hear about the big companies. They happen all the time. They happen every day. Unfortunately, that statement is very true. We generally only hear about the big attacks. We hear about MGM. We hear about Suncor. We hear about Air Canada. We absolutely don't hear about all the little ones that happen every single day, be it a phishing attempt, a company loses 10, 20, 50, $250,000 because money went somewhere when it shouldn't have accidentally. This is something I can't stress enough. Companies, they don't want to risk reputational damage. I think Andrew touched on that in the beginning as well, of publicizing, hey, we lost our data. Hey, we've sent money somewhere and we didn't mean to do it. Hey, we've gone down as far as a website or internal communication. We don't hear about all of these as attacks as a general public. And the consequence to that is, well, we only hear about the big guys. So they're only after the big guys. It's only happening to the big guys. Why would anybody focus on me? I'm 10 employees. I'm 100 employees. I'm $1 million in revenue. I'm 10 million in revenue. I'm not MGM. Why would they come after me? I don't have MGM money. But it happens. Believe me, in our business, we hear about it. We see it almost on a daily basis, supporting our clients and then hearing about other businesses who are attacked. So I don't want to stress this. I don't want to overstress this, but everybody needs to understand that cybersecurity, cyber hygiene is something that you have to take seriously in your business these days, from a reputational, from a business continuity, and just from a saving money, saving time, saving loss standpoint. So the piece that I'm going to focus on for a few slides here, because again, I can't touch on everything, is passwords. Passwords. I almost titled this slide Passwords Smash Words, but I thought that would be weird to type and it'd be funny to read. So I truly hope, as a bunch of us, there's a number of people on this call right now on this webinar, they look at these passwords and they're not reacting like Woody in the picture going, oh yeah, my passwords look like that. Maybe it's password one, maybe it's your birth month, year, day. Maybe it's QWERTY UIOP. That's a common one. If you don't know, those are the letters across the top of the letters on your keyboard. Or simple one-word passwords like baseball. You want to avoid these things like the plague. And if you're curious, does my password make the list? Go onto that Wikipedia website I have noted on the slide here, the 10,000 most common passwords. You do not want to have your password on that list. Absolutely not. So passwords, password integrity, password management, this is the big thing that I want to talk about with everybody here today. I have to tell you, they may seem like a pain, but you need to, at minimum, use those strong suggested passwords. Every login, every user account creation has them. They tell you the criteria, be it symbols, capitals, lowercase numbers, spaces, all of these things, minimum number of characters, usually at least 8. Use those suggested strong passwords. And best practice, something that we advise here at TLC Solutions, and I've adopted for myself, is there's that second option there. Use something like this. It's a lot of characters. The more characters, the better. It throws in the combination of lowercase, uppercase, letters, symbols, sorry. These are the level of password security, password integrity that you want to have on all of your accounts. And you want to make sure that across your accounts, you're mixing them up. You're not using the same password on every single account. This is not new. I didn't create this. This is very common. There's lots of versions of this on the web, on the internet. But ultimately, it explains and it shows how longer passwords, it shows how more complex passwords, when you move from numbers only to symbols on the far right side, how long it will take that password to be cracked. I can tell you a single word password, like baseball, that I shared in one of the previous slides, that can be cracked by a brute force attack. A brute force attack is a program that hackers use to literally throw everything that they can in rapid succession at your login. Once they think they understand what your login username is, likely an email, 1 second. So one word, 1 second, or as it says here, instantly. Those are the things that we all need to be aware of. We need to raise our cyber awareness, understanding of this is the quickness, this is the speed at which an attack can happen. So when you're up to 12 to 18 characters, a mix of symbols and numbers, you're now taking 2 million years for that brute force to attack. You're no longer low-hanging fruit. It's done, right? You have now that level of cyber hygiene that you're preventing somebody from attacking you. As I go through all of this, I do need to make it clear, unfortunately, there is no 100% tool out there. There is no 100% system out there. Something can be hacked. But again, I'll repeat the statement around you don't want to be low-hanging fruit. You don't want your account, once it is hacked, to be put out on the dark web. This is what happens in the world of cyber criminals, threat actors, once they get your access, once they get your login, once they crack one password, it's now out in the world of the dark web to be used, to be bought, to be sold, to potentially attacked in a new account. They may not go after that now, but somebody else will acquire that information and they will get it and they will use it to log in somewhere else. So the world of the dark web is very real, and it's what we want to protect ourselves against. Now, the funny thing is I would imagine there's probably some people on the call right now going, but I like password one. It's easy to remember. I've had the same password for the last 10 years. I don't have to write it down anywhere. I've put it to memory. As easy as that is for you to maintain and remember, the challenge with that is it also makes it really easy for somebody to crack. If we're not updating, if we're not changing passwords, if we're not using complex passwords, as much as a pain it might be, it is the thing that is keeping the business safe, your information safe, your clients' information safe, your team's information safe, and your reputation strong as a business that you're protecting against these cyber crimes and cyber attacks. I have no doubt, whether it's business owner, team member, senior executive, we would all place a high level of attention on keeping our team safe, on keeping our clients safe, and keeping our business safe. IT has to level up to that same desire. And a lot of the times we see it in our business, it's not at the same level. The desire to keep people, clients, companies safe is here, but the IT layers, like what Kenzie talked about, they're not at that same setup. They're not at that same level of execution. So it's us, it's users. We are the front line of defense. It's not the antivirus program. It's not the IT team. It is how we understand, know, are trained on, and are using our own tools for IT protection. I'm going to leave it with this, 2 slides. So I'll leave this up here a little while. This is being recorded so everybody can go back and see this. But these are some basics for the team, individuals on the team. What can we do as individuals to help level up, to raise our cyber hygiene level? Don't use open public networks. I can't stress that enough. Sitting at a Starbucks and using the open public network, that is an absolute no-no from a work standpoint. And updating passwords. I've touched a lot on passwords. I think I've hopefully made my point on the importance of strong passwords. All of these are critical steps for cyber protection. And as a business, use business grade antivirus. I was chatting with somebody just last week who had no antivirus, which in this world, this day and age, is absolutely mind-blowing, but it is reality. These are the things that we have to prove. And I can't stress enough, especially for the manufacturing world, what Kenzie shared, so important, so important that piece of equipment on your production floor, if that has direct access to your network, that has to be changed immediately. So as a takeaway, that is something that I highly stress, listening to what Kenzie shared and putting those layers in and that segmentation. So incredibly important. And last but not least, it's all designed around not being the low-hanging fruit from a cybersecurity standpoint. You want to make sure you're at the top of that tree. You're not the low-hanging fruit, so people pass you by. Mike Nunn, TLC Solutions. Again, Andrew introduced. This is where you can find us. This is who I am. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. That was good. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. So I don't have any immediate follow-up questions for you, so I'm gonna move on. Actually, I do use a password keeper like Bitwarden.
Perfect.
Because
that's good.
Because one of the things you didn't touch on when you're talking about passwords is not using the same password for everything.
Yeah, you don't want to. If I miss that, then that's a critical comment. Yes, don't use the same password for everything. That's what ends up on the dark web. Hey, I just found username this uses this password. Somebody else will take that and go, oh, I wonder if they have a bank account. I wonder if they have a Gmail account. I wonder if they have a this account or a iTunes account, and they'll start using that same password and email or username to log into any account that they can find, Amazon account, Shopify, doesn't matter what it is. So yeah, don't recycle, don't reuse passwords.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Dr. Seelman, you are next on the hot seat.
All right, thank you very much. Very interesting presentations so far. I'm going to be taking a bit of a different perspective on cybersecurity, and I'm going to be more the con side, let's say, of cybersecurity, and talk about some of the hidden risks and some of the hidden costs behind cybersecurity implementations. So when we discuss what makes things secure, for instance, we just sort of excellent presentation from Mike on the subject of passwords. For a lot of people who are, let's say, heavily involved in cybersecurity, or as shown here in the comic, crypto nerds imagination, laptops encrypted, let's build a multi-billion-dollar cluster to crack it, let's spend that 10 million days or years to hack those passwords, and then realize, nope, 4096-bit RSA, the passwords are too complex, we can't do that, forget it, evil plan is foiled. When what actually often tends to happen is laptop's encrypted, okay, drug him, hit him with a wrench until he tells us the password and it's done. What I've seen myself quite often in a lot of facilities actually is that when the passwords become too complex, people just write it on a piece of paper and stick it to the monitor. So that is a very common, let's say, observance of where, let's say, the expectations of cybersecurity and the actual practical implementations of people engaged in cybersecurity practices don't necessarily align. So I will stress this to start. Do we need cybersecurity? Absolutely, 100%. Absolutely. But do all businesses need the same solution, or let's say have to reach the same level? And I see Mike is already agreeing with me. No, absolutely not. And so there's definitely different thresholds and levels of cybersecurity, and choosing a level or threshold of cybersecurity that's specific for your context is absolutely critical. And that's what I'm going to talk a bit about today. So security matters, typical argument. And we just heard, again, a great argument from Mike and Kenzie. Her details were wonderful. I love the graphics you had in your presentation. But this is essentially the argument here, where what we want to do is make it as difficult as possible for an adversary to get into your network. So if you have very little cybersecurity, it might be super simple with minimal effort. Some kind of adversary might be able to get in and do a great deal of damage. Probability of infection or damage is very, very high. With progressively more effort with incremental cost, that risk will plateau or will increase to the point where more secure networks, let's say, have you're not guaranteed to have a breach at some point in time. So this is the ideal. There's a lot of narrative around resiliency. So when we talk about resiliency, really what we're looking at is slowing down propagation from initial compromise to major breaches. So there's lots of ways people can get into a network, and again, Mike was suggesting some good techniques to mitigate this. But everything from weak shared passwords to unpatched vulnerabilities, phishing attacks are still very, very popular. Those are the attacks where people send you emails pretending to be coworkers or your buddy or what have you, and then you click a link that'll take you to a place that ends up compromising your system. And then once they get that foothold in your system, they propagate, they spread around. It can take hundreds of days in some cases, so even years in some cases for cybersecurity attacks to escalate to the point where there's a major breach. So cybersecurity resiliency is very much around limiting this propagation or slowing them down. And so we have some initial best practices that are intended to prevent initial compromises, essentially building the walls around the fortress that is your business, the cyber domain of your business. And then we have other security practices that focus on limiting that propagation to prevent major breaches should someone get in. And this has to do with the threat vector and the size of, let's say, the threat envelope that's at risk. So in terms of how we manage this risk, there's usually trade-off. So we think that more security has a cost of implementation. How much money do we spend on security versus, let's say, the increased risk or cost of a breach? And that's often where the dialogue occurs. Like, how much more money do we have to spend to bring us to the next level of security where we can reduce our risk? But there's something that we don't often talk about or don't often see, and that is the business impact of cybersecurity. So as we're limiting, let's say, threat vectors from propagating through our networks, we also have to put let's say, systems in place that prevent our own employees from progressing as well, or make their lives more difficult. And I've seen lots of people be frustrated with simple things such as passwords, for example, and the fact they have to change them, let's say, every 3 months. That can get some people really, really irritated or even irate. So, and this, again, represents a certain hidden cost of cybersecurity. So if done well, the cost is actually very, very low. But if done poorly or without context, the cost internally can actually be very, very high. So I'm just going to briefly talk about this Johari window. It's this comparison between what the self-consultant knows and doesn't know versus what others, let's say, or the company in your case might know. So for a manufacturing company, there are things that they know and things that they don't know about cybersecurity. Same thing goes for your consultant. There are things that your security consultant knows about their business and knows about your business, but similarly things that they don't know. And so things that, let's say, are known by everyone, it's open, free, there's exchange information. Your cybersecurity consultant knows how your business works, general network architecture, great, everyone's happy. But then there are some things that they know that they don't inform you of, or that you don't know as a company. And these are sort of hidden costs or hidden types of knowledge. And similarly, there are things that your security consultant may not know about your business practices that they are blind to. And in some cases, things that neither of you know. And a lot of this comes down to threat vectors, let's say, that you may not be aware of. So when considering all of this, really, you have to ask yourself, if in your business, you're bringing in a consultant, what is your security consultant's tolerance of risk? How much risk are they willing to tolerate? What are they promising you in terms of their delivery? And to what extent does your consultant care about your own business performance? And this is a very important question as well. If let's say they install technology that reduces your company's risk to exposure to a cybersecurity threat, but also hinders your business performance, to what extent does that dimension factor into their decision-making? So unintended harms resulting from cybersecurity practices can lead to knock-on effects, side effects, and most importantly, maladaptive responses. So ways that, let's say, employees work to get around cybersecurity policies. So I'm going to list four words here, four definitions that you should keep in mind when working with cybersecurity consultants or engaging in cybersecurity practices in general. So first is the concept of risk dumping. So this is when you're shifting risks to entities unprepared to manage the risk where no negotiation regarding risk took place, also known as imposed acceptance. So this is when a security consultant comes in and they say, you know what, we absolutely have to do network segregation. We absolutely have to put up password changing every 3 months. We need to encrypt all your drives, BitLocker and everything. And they will, let's say, insist on these to minimize not only the company's risk to cybersecurity attacks, but also their risk because they're acting as experts in this area. And they want to let's say, minimize threat vectors. However, they may not explain in detail why all of these are necessary. Another one is externalities. So this is where cybersecurity consultants may recommend, for example, certain types of antivirus solutions or endpoint security solutions that inadvertently impact, and so these would be third parties, so that inadvertently impact the general operation of your business, in which case your employees have to find workarounds that your cybersecurity consultant can't help you with because it's a third party, thereby externalizing the problem. And ultimately, your employees often have to deal with this, which can be a very frustrating experience for them. And I'll give examples for all of these in a moment, so no worries. I'm just moving through this very quickly. Next is information asymmetry. And so this is where those impacted by risk management actions may not have the information to manage change and workflow appropriately. This is also very, very common when, let's say, new technology is installed or new security policies are implemented that aren't fully disclosed to people who are affected by that technology. So antivirus softwares, for example, that have false positives that prevent your engineering software from working is a very common example of this, where the engineering team may not be consulted or informed of the new security policies, and therefore technology, which has been working fine for years, suddenly stops working and they don't know why. And last is moral hazards. And this usually happens with big companies. So big security consultants, large manufacturing companies with multiple offices. This is where the security analyst consultant may take no action to meaningfully support users who have been disempowered, provided it creates no harm for the consultant. So a common example here would be, let's say, setting up firewalls, as Kenzie described, wonderfully at every single tier. Brilliant, wonderful. We have this perfect system of firewalls implemented. But now internally, someone says, okay, we want to install a new server. We want to install a new device. Or we have something's changed its MAC address, and now we have to put in a ticket with our consultant to open up a port or to whitelist this device, and that process takes weeks. And in the meantime, things may really slow down because you need this piece of technology on the floor, and this creates a lot of stress for employees. So this moral hazard really is the obligation, let's say, your contractor has or your consultant has to compromise security for the sake of productivity. Okay, so I'm going to quickly move through 4 case studies, kind of giving examples of each one. And these are all from my own personal experience. So I'm happy to address questions or talk about this more if you'd like. I won't mention which city, but again, this happened. This is a city. They're in Alberta. They hired an IT consultant to interconnect the city-managed IT infrastructure. So they had, public Wi-Fi at the pool. They had their town hall. They had all kinds of types of infrastructure on the city, and they just wanted to bring everything together into a common network to save some cost and to increase scalability and so on. So they brought in a consultant to do this. They did this, no problem, but as part of their investigation of networks managed by the city, they found an OT network, and this was part of their wastewater treatment system. And it was a network that communicated between all the different sites for wastewater treatment management in the town. And the consultant went ahead and just hooked up this infrastructure to their IT network directly, no firewalls, basically on the premise that they didn't want to adopt, or let's say risk their contract by saying we didn't do all networks, so we're just going to make this connection without fully understanding it and dump all the risk on the client, in this case, the city. So the impact, the OT infrastructure, which was critical infrastructure, started randomly failing. And so there was loss of communications on that network. They brought in a separate OT consultant hired by the city to find the cause. It showed how to, and this OT consultant came in and from the public pool showed how to disable the PLCs or disable the infrastructure in the OT network and shut down the water treatment plant. So this of course caught their attention, and fortunately the outcome was very good. Within a couple of days, they disconnected the two networks, and the OT network was allowed to exist on its own, protected from the IT network. So here's an example of a little bit of risk dumping where a consultant didn't have a full understanding of the networks they were working with, but decided to put the risk on the customer or the client. So next, externalities. So here I was involved with a medium-sized manufacturing company with a firmware team. So firmware and software teams are very common for those of you who do R&D. Security consultant closes outbound ports and forces traffic through third-party proxy. So this is when, as shown down here, you have a client machine. These would be, let's say, workstations used by your engineering staff, for example. And instead of connecting to the internet directly, all communications goes through a third-party proxy server instead. And these proxy servers can often be hosted by third parties, such as Zscaler, for example, is a very common one. And they provide endpoint decryption for analyzing packets and looking for security threats and so on, and all communications that pass in and out of the building, essentially. So not all that uncommon, but this I would consider to be a higher tier in terms of security. Problem, however, was that the third-party proxy that was brought in to provide this function often changed IP addresses and properties of their proxy servers that prevented the firmware team from successfully deploying their tools on a regular basis. And so their tool chain would simply fail because proxy server changed its IP address or something of that sort, and it could shut things down for hours or in some case days, and overnight builds would break, and it was generally a very difficult system to work with and caused a great deal of stress for this team over a period of years. This is not days, this is not months, this is an ongoing problem for years. And it was also identified that this third-party proxy, which is predominantly located in the US, actually permitted for privacy violations as well. It broke SSL authentication by scanning, for instance, employees when they connected to their bank accounts to check to see if they received their paycheck. All of that would be decrypted by the proxy service and monitored and examined. Passwords would be explored in plain text and so on. So there are actually some significant moral and legal issues associated with this solution as well. Unfortunately, this became an ongoing problem for the company, and to the point where the firmware team created a non-compliant proxy workaround, including bringing in another internet connection just off like a Shaw internet to get around this proxy because it was so difficult to work with. I think I'm still okay for time. I have a couple more minutes. Next, we have an example of information asymmetry. This was a big manufacturing company developing industrial mechatronics devices. So big systems, $100,000 a piece, complex with integrated firmware and software, cloud support. The security consultant, I'm going to name them this time because they are the worst security software I've ever worked with, is Silence Endpoint Security as an antivirus solution for the business. They basically just installed this with a policy push on all the machines inside the business. There was no warning given, minimal information shared with the company. So in other words, the higher ups knew that this was happening, the engineering teams did not. And this was, I think, 200 engineering staff with this company. And then overnight, there was a massive silent quarantining of engineering tools. So all kinds of engineering tools across the company broke. They simply would stop running or they'd crash randomly. Installing upgrades or new tools would break. And all of this was ultimately attributed to false positives, which were hidden by the software. So engineers could not identify this. So it took a great deal of effort to figure this out. This caused months of delays in product security patches and firmware upgrades, hundreds of hours of lost engineering technical time in the first 3 months until it was understood what was happening. And even then, even when it was understood that it was Silence that was causing these problems, there was no good solution for it because it's an antivirus, an AI-driven antivirus technology, which is maybe 99.5% accurate, but therefore still characterizes a lot of valuable tools as threats when in fact they aren't. Their solution was to whitelist certain folders on engineering machines for any suspicious tools, as in normal engineering productivity tools, which engineers hated the solution, but it was ultimately the compromise. So the security technology stayed, and engineers had to find a way to work around it. No consequences at all for the security consultant on this. And the last one I'm going to bring up is an example of moral hazards. So this again was a big manufacturing company developing embedded communication gateways, and so their engineering team was very cognizant of cybersecurity. They were implementing cybersecurity practices in the technology the company was selling, and the security consultant came in and locked down the network and applied strict firewall rules, which are general best practices. I mean, Kenzie was describing this, for example, and absolutely having strict firewall rules is very, very important. But in the manner it was done, all the devices that were used for development, all the devices that were being used for testing, and ultimately for sale, were automatically blocked from access to this network. And so the engineering team had to go through a process of requesting security exceptions all the time for new product development, for new types of firmware they were developing. And the turnaround was 4 to 6 weeks. And so there were massive delays, again, in product development, a great deal of additional stress for developers, leading to a moral hazard. And the reason why it's a moral hazard in this case is because the security consultant who was managing the firewall had no obligation to move quickly, let's say in this case. They said, we'll handle this within about a day, but weeks later, nothing would happen. And so there's a massive stack up of tickets. After several months, actually, the security consultant in this case changed their ticketing system and deleted all the old tickets. And so all the requests had to be resent. Huge headache, again, incredibly stressful for the company. The company actually ultimately spent $250,000 to install a separate DMZ, so demilitarized zone engineering network to accommodate engineering to get around this problem, which worked great for 2 or 3 years until cybersecurity came in again and said, you know what, we're not going to allow that anymore. And then they installed the same network policies on the engineering network, and the same problem started all over again. So the $250,000 was money wasted. So in summary, I'm going to say that there is a hidden cost to cybersecurity, especially if you get really into the really intense levels of cybersecurity where you're trying to really minimize risk. A few things to consider. So one, hold your consultant accountable for externalities and lost productivity. So ask for false positives and the real value of security decisions, to understand why you're doing the things that you're doing when your consultant recommends certain decisions. Measure productivity loss due to cybersecurity actions. So keep this in mind when moving forward with actions. Demand context-sensitive solutions that align with your business and technology strategies. This is absolutely essential. It's so easy, honestly, for security consultants to push in a whole bunch of general best practices and walk away. It costs them less because it's a process that they already understand. But if it's not context sensitive, then you can run into all kinds of problems with productivity. Greatest security flaw is usually people, and I think that Mike mentioned this as well, and it's absolutely true. And so I'm going to stress what he's already mentioned, and that is to train, engage, consult, and inform, and very importantly, involve your technical people in decision making as well at the security level. So get them involved, get their buy-in, and if they have that buy-in, then they'll be much more inclined to, let's say, support those security policies long term. And then last, I'm going to mention avoid lock-in with a single cybersecurity consultant. So once these policies are implemented, make sure that you're flexible and can shift from consultant to consultant, so that they don't feel like they can impose those moral hazards and implement poor service once the initial work has been done. So that's it. That's it for me. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to address questions when the time comes, or expand on any one of these examples.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Seelman. You can kill your screen share. Perfect. So I just, for those who missed it, Kenzie posted the difference between IT and OT into the chat, so that for people who are complete morons like me and would have asked that question. So
I think we've all mentioned it. So I was like,
and I just thought that was really fascinating how important it is to ensure that your cybersecurity consultant has a really good understanding of what your business is. So that was excellent. Thank you. And finally, last but not least, of course, we're going to move on to Sean, who's going to probably tell you the opposite of what Dr. Seelman said. So we'll see how that pans out.
I'm not going to contradict. No. It's going to be great. 1 second here, everybody. All right. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
We can. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for having me today. These have been great presentations. I've actually learned a lot listening in here, so it's been fabulous. And a shout out to Dr. Christoph, Johari window. Brilliant. It's my favorite tool for analyzing what is unknown, particularly. All right, let's get going on the cybersecurity and insurance. So I'm the bad news guy, but I promise at the end of it, it will be a positive thing. So let's just go through it, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. Christoph actually said in our earlier meeting, fear mongering, which I try not to do, but it's live my life, and you'll experience something similar. All right, so what are the CEOs saying? Clorox breach points to better hygiene, and then 3 big manufacturing exposures. So here we go. Just want to make mention, 56% of CEOs at large companies say they are well prepared or very well prepared for future cyber attacks, down from 73% in 2021. Wanted to mention there, that is actually not a bad number. What that means from my standpoint, where I sit every day, is that CEOs are beginning to realize, oh, we are not as well prepared as we thought we were. And so I wanted to say, well, that number, we'd like to see that number grow, people being more prepared. There are so many claims coming through and so many incidents happening that CEOs are becoming more and more aware that they are not as prepared as they thought. We're not going to hit every single one of these. You can read them afterwards, as I'm sure we'll populate these documents afterwards. But the one I want to hit is that 59% said building a strong cybersecurity culture is as important as building technology controls, which is down from 83% last year and lower than the global average of 73%. These are all KPMG Canadian insights. And what they're basically, what it says to me is, because of the advent of AI, there seems to be a fascination that AI can solve our cybersecurity control issues. And I just want to say that the same tools that we could use to control will be used to attack. That number is a little disturbing, because the next slide I'm going to show you indicates very clearly where the attacks are coming from and where they happen most. So we're going to go down, and I'll use my pen here to write this a little bit. Move that out of the way. Down here, right under there, phishing. Phishing is 59% of access to the systems when it comes to attack vectors. So an attack vector is how people get access to your system. You'll see the rest of them: external remote access services, exploited public-facing applications, trusted relationships, drive-by compromises. Those are open ports that you can literally, that they can just see on the dark web, but which are all real things. But 59% is phishing, and that means people, which relates back to the previous slide when it comes to a culture of cybersecurity. We want to be encouraging that people need to be involved every single day in the safety of your organization and your manufacturing industry. We see regular claims that are just simply about people with the best of intention not being trained how to recognize those phishing emails. Most of the claims we see come through as a result of that. Up above on the claims insight, this data, by the way, comes from Coalition. This is Canadian data, but what it is based is saying that 224,000 is the average cyber claim. Now, I want to look at that number, and it's easy to go at that moment and say, well, that's not too bad. Those are the claims, and what happens in the event of a claim is, particularly when it comes to Coalition or CFC or Chubb even now, just entered into a new relationship with a security company, is that the insurers have realized that they need to have robust systems that are not simply about paying claims, they're about preventing and minimizing claims. And Coalition, I'll just use them as an example, they are one of the best at reducing claims because they use tremendous tools to, first of all, let's say you have a funds transfer fraud, they've been able to reclaim up to 64% of the funds that were transferred by vectoring through the systems and finding out where those funds went and reclaiming them. They've been able to mitigate and bring down the overall claims exposures. CFC, same thing. Chubb will now have the same ability. So you do need to, not all cyber insurers are created equal. So you need to be aware of that, and you need to be asking the questions of your broker at the time. Do these infrastructures, do these safety infrastructures exist with this current insurer, or are we on our own finding our own supports on the backside of an event. So these numbers are greatly deflated compared to what the actual costs are to companies if they do not have these types of insuring products. Some say, well, how often are these actual claims happening? What I can tell you is that in the last 3 years, we have seen an 1,100% increase in claims from cyber attacks. And what I heard somebody say in London when I was there recently, they were chatting about cyber insurance, and they said, it is the only product that you can buy, insurance product you can buy. It's similar to like the metaphor they use is if your house was on fire and you picked up the phone and said, hey, I want to buy fire insurance. So what they're saying is you can actually buy cyber insurance, and the cyber insurers are coming into these situations knowing that there is likely a claim going to occur or occurring without the awareness of the company that they've insured, which is why they say, are you aware of a claim? But they also know that behind the scenes, you're likely not aware, but there is probably a claim happening at that time. With that said, go to the next slide here. Clorox bleach points to better hygiene. So Clorox had a breach August 14th. This is an example. And this is a quote from one of their internal people, Ali Millen. And the quote basically says that this has caused a meaningful impact on our first quarter financial results due to processing delays and product shortages. It also said that it gives rival terms a chance to fill the void for our product shortages and get the foot in the door with our customers. So in the case of Clorox, which obviously is a highly sought after product right now, they are talking multi-million dollars of infrastructure damage to them, sorry, not infrastructure, of loss of revenue due to their infrastructure not being robust enough to fight off a significant cyber attack. So much so that they had to file it on September 18th with the Security and Exchange Commission. So this just points to the power of these attacks when it comes to its effect on companies. 3 big exposures for manufacturers. Ransomware. It is everywhere, and it is not going away. You can do a simple math calculation. What we're finding is that for every $1 million of revenue, which by the way, in the dark web, they can figure out your revenue. If you are caught in a ransomware, they will come to you for every $1 million of revenue. It is roughly $10,000 of demand. So you can figure out your revenue on that and figure out what your exposure is typically in revenue and the ransomware demand. Ransomware gets access into your system almost always by the phishing emails. It sits in your system. The average Canadian company has a malware in its system for 168 days before they become aware of it. And in 168 days, that malware can worm its way into many, many systems, including backups. The second one, particularly for manufacturers, is direct damage to property and bodily injury. Now, most policies, when you think about your property policies that you currently have in place, if a cyber breach causes one of your mechanical presses, let's say you're a printer and a mechanical press overheats and bursts into flames and causes massive damage or bodily injury to your plant, your property policy, if it is found to be sourced as a cyber breach, will not cover the damage. This is a big statement. You need to check your policies because as a manufacturer, we need to make sure that we have direct property damage and bodily injury included in our cyber policies if they are purchased, because that is where you'd find cover for the property. This has been tested and found, and because of the exposure on the manufacturing side, there are only about 3 insurers that will cover property damage and bodily injury as a result of a cyber breach. So again, I want to highlight the importance of making sure you're not just buying cyber, but you're buying cyber that relates to manufacturing. And then the last one is on the business interruption side. This is the one that we're seeing growing and growing. Again, if your operations are shut down, taking the example of Clorox, if your operations are shut down from August 14th until they said they were back up and running October 2nd, you can figure out what your potential loss of business is. Your property policy will not cover you for the loss of business interruption. It must be found in your cyber policy. So these are the three core coverages that I think that particularly for manufacturers, we need to be very, very aware of. And I think with that, I will stop sharing my screen. Trying to stop sharing my screen.
You stopped.
Excellent.
I can see you. There we go. Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone. That was really, really informative. And that key piece that I got from Sean's presentation was really around the necessity to make sure that your cybersecurity coverage actually addresses the right things. I mean, I had no idea about the physical damage piece wouldn't be covered by a regular policy if it's a result of cybersecurity. So that's excellent feedback. So thank you. All right, so we're now going to turn over to a Q&A session. And I'm going to ask that you, as participants in this Q&A, because there's a lot of you, if you could actually use the raise your hand function, and we will go down that route. So. However, but before we get to you as participants on the call, I'll give you time to think about what your questions might be. I'm actually going to go back to the panelists and circle back through them one by one and kind of see if they have any questions for each other, so we can get that experts asking experts thing. Cirque, we'll start. We'll go right back to Kenzie. And Kenzie, do you have any questions for the other panelists?
Not necessarily a question, but just a comment that kind of all of us have touched on is not only does this just apply at work, apply it at home too. One of the big things that is, I'm sure 90% of people on this call have is Google Homes or some form of that. Firewalls. So people tell me that I'm way too old school all of the time. I do not have any of that in my house because it takes me about 15 minutes if I am within range to actually hack a Google Home. So just making sure that some of these principles, apply them at home just as you do at work. It kind of goes both ways. So making sure that you do have a firewall at home if you are automating your home to that extent. Password security, making sure that you aren't using the same password for your lights as you do your banking information, because it's really not hard to get. So just those same kind of things, they do apply in both settings, not just to your work environment.
Perfect. Thanks, Kenzie. Mike, you're next.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. That's a fantastic point, Kenzie, around the tools that a company has. It may protect something in your physical building, but in today's world of hybrid work environments, work from home, work from office, there are tools on the market that can protect that device, that endpoint, whether it's at home or at work, much better than a basic antivirus tool can do. So outside of the infrastructure at home and firewalls, as Kenzie described, the tools that you use, do they work in a hybrid environment? So just wanted to throw that out there. I have a question for Sean, though. When it comes to insurance and companies come to you for insurance, cyber insurance, what are you seeing from those companies as far as their posture, their infrastructure, their environment? Do they have no tools? Do they have some? Is it about leveling up? What do you see when companies approach you?
It's all over the map. Just basically, it's most often they're coming to us and they're saying, so there's early adopters of cyber insurance. Then there's always early adopters. Then there's midterm, and then there's late adopters. We're getting into the phase now where it's roughly 59% of companies in Canada carry some sort of cyber cover. So we're now getting into late adopters, and when late adopters come, it's usually because they've had a breach, and they now want to get insurance for the future. Because their infrastructure failed them, their systems failed them. They thought they were okay, and they ended up not being. So when they come, insurers have also gotten smarter over time. And so they are looking for, what is your cyber hygiene? You know, do you have MFA? Do you have segmentation? They're asking intelligent questions now. Do you require new passwords every 3 months, every 6 months, all that kind of stuff. So the bar has been raised by the insurers, and the people that are coming to us, they're basically, usually they're approved for a policy because they already have generally pretty good practices. But that said, it's the human factor, and that's usually what's hit them. The human factor has caused this breach in their system. The human factor, with the best of intentions, they clicked on the email that was from the CFO saying, "Hey, pay attention to this," and they with best intentions got manipulated, and they clicked on the email, and then it wormed its way into the system. So the answer is the human factor is the leading cause that is driving people to buy insurance, and it's there for that reason, because it is, there's only so much you can do, but the insurers continue to raise the bar. What is your education practice? Do you test your employees at random and send fake emails to see if they click on them? Like, what is your intentional structure?
Love it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Just see a question pop up in the chat there. A couple questions pop up in the chat, both from Wanda. Get a copy of the recording from Leninka. We'll put that when we send out our note to everybody. Sean is with Athera Insurance. Now got a hand up from doctor, our good doctor. Fire away. I'm gonna keep calling you that.
Sure, that's fine. So I think all of us have brought up at some point in time that there are significant, or at least that a lot of cybersecurity incidents occur because of people, or because of and we may be thinking that's inadequate training. We may think that is, let's say, intention of harm in some cases. I just want to bring up a study from Harvard last year, and I just want to get the panel's opinion on this, if that's okay. So Harvard did a study, or a team at Harvard did a study of 330 remote employees who worked at various companies. Amongst these employees, 67% reported that they failed to follow all cybersecurity policies for their company while working remotely. Of the 67% that failed to follow the cybersecurity policies, 85% broke the rules knowingly. So they were well informed, but they broke the rules anyway. And then when asked, well, why did you break the rules? The vast majority of them, so only 3% said harm, because they were angry at the company or having a really bad day, and so they want to do something bad. 85%, however, the vast majority claimed that they broke cybersecurity policies to better accomplish tasks for their job, to get something they needed, and or to help others get their work done. And so these are the leading causes of people, the vast majority of people in businesses, to let's say, violate cybersecurity policies. So I'm just a question for the panel then is, how do businesses, let's say, develop a culture or promote a culture or strategy around cybersecurity where people don't feel compelled to violate cybersecurity policies for these reasons?
I can jump in on that briefly. I think it ultimately comes down to this personal opinion. IT professionals are generally viewed in a lot of cases as the paramedics. They come in when there's an issue, they fix it, and they escape. I think a big component of making sure that cybersecurity and IT best practices are married with the company is making sure that the IT team has a seat at the strategic decision level. They're part of the culture, they're part of the business, they're not the team that comes in at the end. It's treated as a culture of one, and IT is kept, or cybersecurity is kept at that high level in the business, and they're viewed as that equal player around the table. So I think that's a high level answer, but I think if that's not the state in the company, I think that's a key component to making sure that it's viewed, I guess, with the same level of intensity that whether it's HR, finance, or sales, or production, that it has in the business.
Could I jump in on that?
Yep, go ahead.
I'll use just another example. That's, let's say your business has a lot of welding. Your business, your welders are trained how to use the welding equipment safely. They use the precautions that are required to not injure themselves, others, or your property. We don't live in a world where cyber breaches have minimal impact on our business. We live in a world where it can shut us down, it can burn us down, metaphorically speaking. So I would suggest that while it is inconvenient, companies need to embrace and teach their employees from day one that they are a part of the solution. And if they're part of the problem, there are consequences attached to that. Because it's from where I sit and what I see every day, it's the same. Whether you're on a keyboard or you got a MIG welder in your hand, you can have the same effect.
Kenzie.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, I thought I was still muted. I'm gonna kind of add to that. So I, unlike the other three, I am definitely on the deployment side of systems, designing systems, and working hand in hand through the design process with your IT team. There's definitely times where I will push back and say this will not work. I know in the mining industry, I did a lot of field work. And one of the things was they wanted us to lock down to these rugged computers. And so anytime I went out to a piece of equipment, I had to have 3 different computers with me to access different layers. And that's just not feasible when you're climbing up and down 3 stories on equipment, having 3 separate laptops. It just didn't work. So going back and forth, you put your IT team, your security team, and your deployers or your engineers all at a table, and hopefully all of them can get to a better solution. So really having that back and forth communication of, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to go, this is my plan, how can we do this together? And there is some of that risk acceptance. So if you have a very strong upper layer firewall, so that when you get down and you're on a jump server and you're going to that next layer, maybe setting up logging so that you can log all of your communication in that layer, instead of adding another step for your designers or your developers. Adding those little checkpoints along the way is sometimes a lot better, especially for culture and your engineers, than having to put in these complex systems. It can just go to logging and monitoring those communications back and forth, and having that back and forth with your team of, like my IT guys, some of them are on the call, of just, hey, I'm doing this, make sure you can catch logging on it, whether I'm running from the command line or a new script or anything like that, check for vulnerabilities through what I'm actually doing. But yeah, having sometimes complex systems aren't the best approach, and it is that back and forth between your IT team, your security team, and your developers.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenzie. So I noticed we've got a number of hands up at the minute, so I'll circle back to those in just a second. But to address Christoph's question, the one piece that no one has mentioned yet in terms of trying to change culture within an organization, it really does have to start at the top, and your leadership, your executive, your CEO has to be seen as a active, engaged participant in cybersecurity. And give it as much attention as they give to, other key elements of your organization, if you're going to create a culture that embraces it. I'm going to go to the audience before I come back to Dr. Seelman. I've got 3 hands up, starting with Jason Hutton. What have we got here? It's like a question. High password change frequency with complex passwords is often something that users work around, writing passwords down, for example, and has productivity costs, locked accounts due to forgotten passwords. What are other good potential alternatives to that typically? 2-factor solutions, perhaps, or password managers, biometrics, or is it that simply difficult? Is that simply difficult or significantly more expensive to avoid? A necessary evil may be required by insurance. There we go. So options for password management.
Just
Mike, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that. So 2-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, Jason called that out. that needs to be a necessity in your business. If you don't have multi-factor authentication, it should be deployed. It's a great step for cybersecurity to add an extra layer of protection, one of the many layers. And the other is the complexity of the password. If you have that something complex like that example I shared, use something like this with symbols, letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase. The frequency question, I think we can start to define that doesn't need to be changed weekly, or that realistically doesn't need to be changed monthly. The more complex of a password you have, you can work with your IT team or you can work with your IT consultant. What is best practice on changing or updating this password? So I don't see it as something that is a weekly necessity, but monthly, quarterly, again, depending on the complexity of the password. So that can be a win-win work with the team.
Good. Thanks, Mike. Does anyone else want to chime in on that before I go to the next question? John?
Yeah, I'll just say that what we're finding that if you have MFA, the insurers are not asking for how often you change your passwords. But if you have 2FA, they are. Or no FA, then they definitely ask.
Christoph.
Great, thank you. I wasn't going to mention anything, but now that it's come up, I do take some exception to the table that Mike presented in terms of how fast passwords can be hacked. I think that table is probably over 20 years old at this point in time. And there are definitely some very straightforward technical solutions that could be implemented. So for example, the arbiter, or the system that, let's say, indicates whether or not a password has successfully authenticated or not, could only accept an inquiry against an account once a second, for example. And this completely defeats brute force attacks, which in Mike's table assume that they can do infinite queries all the time. So there are certain things that can be done to dramatically, let's say, reduce the efficacy of bulk attacks against passwords. So I'm not as big a proponent of let's say, rapid cycling of passwords as is often presented here, or complexity. So that's something else that should be stressed too, is that the system has to be able to accept that bit width, or in other words, that system has to accept symbols and numbers and letters. But if the system accepts complex passwords, then the brute force attack has to examine that entire bit space, or that entire possibility space. But individual passwords need not have those systems in them, or symbols in them, to have that same level of security, or something very, very close to it. So again, I think there's a little bit of perhaps embellishment that's happening in terms of the criticality of complex passwords in systems, but I do strongly believe in MFA. I think I absolutely agree that's a very important second layer of second layer of security on passwords.
Thank you. I have a question from Jeff.
Yeah, my question is very much in line with this last question. Really, it was the government in Canada has put out guidance on password lengths. They actually promote password length over complexity. And kind of what Christoph was saying too, right? If you're having upper, lowercase, and numbers, but a longer password, way stronger than just having a shorter password with complex things. But the second part that they're actually putting out is they're basically saying forcing people to change password is actually not helpful. See, forcing users to change their password at regular intervals put a significant burden on users and has little effect on security. I kind of agree with that, right? I was kind of curious to the board's panel of actually having no requirement to change passwords at all, and just changing it when people leave and that sort of stuff. I was kind of curious to hear that.
So I noticed Christoph was putting his thumbs up. Did you want to dive in there, or?
Sure, and this perhaps highlights a little bit of maybe where some misconceptions can come from cybersecurity practices. I'll just give a couple more examples. Just in the last few weeks, I've received cybersecurity audits for systems that I've managed in the past, and I'll highlight things such as this library is 2 minor revisions out of date, 5 out of 5 security risk. This here is slightly out of date, 4 out of 5. But then when you get into dig into the details, you realize that there's actually no security risk. There's no known vulnerabilities for this, or this is not really a risk at all. So there are certain generalities that can be produced by people who advocate for cybersecurity, which may be overstating the necessity, and certain, let's say, best practices from 20 years ago may still persist today, but perhaps are not reflecting other changes in technology that reduce that risk. So as far as changing passwords, I I think that I would argue that once a year is probably sufficient. You don't need to be cycling every 3 months. And the risk of cycling every 3 months, particularly if you invalidate the last 12 passwords, which is also a very common practice, is that people will get frustrated. They will forget the passwords. They'll either harass IT, or more likely they'll write them down someplace. And suddenly that password becomes a new vulnerability because individuals don't have that buy-in. And they become frustrated with the system, and they look for ways of working around those security implementations. So you have to find that balance between what people are willing to do and what actually means, or what represents meaningful improvements in security.
Thanks. I got Sean, then Mike.
From a technical standpoint, I agree with Christoph. From a vulnerability standpoint, from an internal nefarious actor, I would disagree. And the reason I would disagree is that I have seen many people use their neighbor's password on the exit of their employment to take data out of a company because they never changed the password. And Bonnie's password has always been password 123. And a great deal amount of data has been lost. IP has been lost through that vector. So I would suggest that while changing it every 3 months may be excessive, I would still encourage you to change the passwords so that Bonnie can't use password 123, and then Steve takes data out of your company using her password, so he's not tracked.
I hope there's no one named Bonnie and Steve on the call. Mike.
I think it's so incredibly distressed. As much as I talked about passwords over a few slides in the presentation, it is only one layer to every component of a cybersecurity best practice, whether you call it policy or practices that you have in place. Sean brought up a great example. What are your employee decommissioning practices? How do you make sure that when employees leave the company, that they are actually fully exited from your system, their user, their passwords, their logins, their everything, that they don't have access to the neighbor's password? We're making sure that your neighbor doesn't have her, I think it was Christoph, Dr. Seelman, who said this, they don't have that post-it note on their monitor that somebody can just look over and see. There's so many levels beyond just the infrastructure and the network. It's the physical environment as well. That post-it note, very much physical environment. So there are so many layers to this. Let's not get caught up on the password piece. It's all of the layers, from physical to training to passwords to MFA to segmentation. I mean, there's more layers than that. So it's a big piece I just wanted to stress there.
All right, so I've got kind of a blank on questions in a minute, no hands up. I encourage you all to really think about the things you might want to know. Otherwise, I might just start picking on people and asking them. Oh, I've got Jeff with his hand up again. There we go. Thank you, Jeff. I'm glad you're engaged.
I got a list of questions, but so what's recommendations on like one thing we say to users if they have an email where they're not sure about a link, and we always encourage them to contact IT. But the other thing we say is, if you have an iPhone, you can always try looking at the link on the iPhone just to make sure, because it's typically way less vulnerable than a computer. I know it's not necessarily the best answer, but really, how many times do you hear of an iPhone vulnerability? Go ahead.
Mike.
I think I have potentially a bit of a unique opinion on this. When it comes to those emails, when it comes to that suspicious email, and my personal opinion is everybody should be suspicious of email. There's certain things that you can look for. Is the email the correct email? You can try to dissect the email. Is it correct? The best case scenario is, if your antenna are up even a little, delete the email and contact that person who sent the email. There is no harm in doing that, in saying, hey, I just got an email from you asking me to send you a check for X amount of money, or log into some link that you sent. Did you actually send that? You could be the person that tips them off that they've got somebody in their system and they didn't know it, and these emails are going out to their entire contact list. So when in doubt, and it's odd in this world of cybersecurity and online and AI, that potentially threats like this and the volume of threats like this could force us to actually connect with people more. That's my soapbox opinion on that topic, but there's nothing wrong with deleting that email and phoning. They'll happily resend the email if it's for some business process that needs to be connected. But phone, check, follow up, ask. Don't just follow the link. Don't just do the thing that the email says. if you're suspicious, if your antenna are up.
But I don't have a phone number for that Nigerian prince. I I see I've got another question in the comments here. Hang on just one second. From Sandy, what do you recommend in terms of multi-factor authentication MFA as opposed to just 2FA? Maybe some examples there. Who wants to go first? I'm going to pick on someone. Christoph, what do you recommend as MFA instead of 2FA?
You can use a combination of, let's say, biometrics, passwords, phone verification. You can get phone apps as well, which will store biometric information about the user, ensure that, let's say, through the phone app, you have connected on the right phone. You unlock the phone itself, and then that in turn will get a password from, or at least some kind of authentication code, which you can then send back. So there's all kinds of services, honestly, available. If you look for MFA online, that would be, I'd say, appropriate for your business. But most of them do assume that you have some kind of either security device with you or a phone that runs an app for that purpose.
Kenzie is someone who's actually an implementer.
I think there is a balance here, and there's ways to get around it. So for me, if I am on that bottom layer of the network, I don't want to multi-factor every single time I connect into one of our machines. But getting into that layer, I should multi-factor. Getting that first initial, it needs to be multi-factor. But once you're in, there is ways, whether it's you're on the network, you're in the right area physically, you're on in the right layer of your network, and once you're there, then you can kind of have free reign. But yeah, as on the developer side, I have had my fair share of frustrations with multi-factor, where you're spending more time authenticating that it's you than actually doing work. And when you're trying to firefight in the field, you are screaming at your computer pretty quick. So again, trying to find that balance and working with your IT team to get that balance of, okay, I'm here. If I'm in this location, if I'm on this network, if I'm in this zone, it's okay. This is what I'm going to be doing. These are the scripts I'm going to be running. Anything like that, you can define what actions you're allowed to and not to do, or kind of what realm you're going to perform in, and that can be accepted. And then your multi-factor isn't 15 times within 10 minutes.
A burden. Sean, I see you've got your hand up.
I was just going to comment that what Mackenzie said, from an insurer perspective, they only care about first layer access. They want to know that when you go in, you're going into the zone you're supposed to be in, and they're going to look at the infrastructure. Is it segmented? Like, do they have access to other segmentations as a result of that access? But they care about first layer.
All right, so I've got a question from Sarah. We touched on this a bit earlier. What advice recommendations would you have to get employees to buy in for cybersecurity policies such as MFA, password changes, or increased security systems that require them to participate to be effective? Mm-hmm. So we talked a bit about that earlier, like how do you participate? How do you kind of generate that culture change to make people participate? Christoph had that data from Harvard. You never actually answered your own question. So I'll go to you first. How do you think you can get people to buy in and participate?
I think this is one of the key questions in cybersecurity, honestly. So technical factors aside, given that the person matters so much, and it's possible to circumvent cybersecurity practices, it is absolutely essential that people buy in. So the first thing I'll say, and I think this goes against what others were saying a little bit, was that I believe that everyone should be considered a stakeholder in the process. So I do think absolutely you do need to have, let's say, CEOs and businesses and top level management support these changes. But the process by which that happens can include things such as changing job expectations. So recognizing that they're implementing policies that will reduce productivity by 20% and permitting people less stress in their work, or slowing down, let's say, productivity as a result, or changing job descriptions to reflect, let's say, limited access as a result of cybersecurity. But That aside, ultimately it comes down to consultation and stakeholder engagement. So meeting with people and not just telling them this is happening, you have to do it, but actually engaging with them and say, this is important to us because it will protect us in the events of these breaches. It'll make your life easier because of X. We're de-risking by this percentage. And if you have any problems at any point in time, your local advocate is going to be this person here. Go talk to them, and they have the authority to let's say roll back some cybersecurity decisions or poke holes in firewalls or reset passwords or something along those lines that at least give people some ongoing feeling of ownership. Cybersecurity is ultimately a process of, and I'll put it in rather stark terms, taking away people's rights, or at least perceived rights. Or privileges, if nothing else. The act of engaging in cybersecurity or incrementing cybersecurity, people feel squeezed. It can put at risk their privacy, can put at risk their freedom that they've had to work, let's say, unimpeded within a network or within a certain application environment. So to really get them to buy into that sort of thing, which is absolutely critical in my opinion, you have to engage them early, and not just consult, but actually give them an opportunity to be a stakeholder and have a say and how security is implemented, and come up with suggestions on how it will impact their day-to-day job, and recognize that those impacts should be reflected in job descriptions, in pay potentially, and in expectations for performance.
Perfect, thanks. I see I'll get Mike to answer the question next, and then Kenzie, before I come to a new question from Jason. So you're not saying one motivation could be just saying, hey, have an award for the best password, and then you share the best password with everyone? Just kidding. So Mike, then Kenzie, and then I'll come to you, Jason, for the next question.
I definitely echo something Dr. Kristoff said around explain the why. You got to start with why. The team, the company needs to understand why it's important from a prevention standpoint. What is the risk that we are preventing? So that's by far the most important piece. And to touch on something Kenzie said earlier around bringing IT beyond just IT and OT, but bring IT into the conversation around workflow, around process, around let's not make something that's incredibly cumbersome. I have 3 key programs in our business, and I use MFA to log in once a day. That's a step that I'm going to take to ensure that we have that security in our systems in these 3 key programs to protect our clients and our team and our business. That's acceptable. Kenzie, the example she gave of 10 MFA logins in 15 minutes or something like that, that's too much. So getting the IT team to the table to understand that is critical. So those would be the key pieces for me, but also explaining that, hey team, yes, you will have to enter this code when you log in once a day, once a week, whatever that time frame is, again, based on the system and the setup. But the why is incredibly important in marrying that with the workflow in the business.
All right, so Kenzie and Sean, is this relevant to this question? Yep, okay, so Kenzie first, then Sean.
So just like kind of touching on both what Kristoff and Mike said, doing risk acceptance. No matter what you do, whether it's cybersecurity or just in life, you have to have some acceptance of risk and making sure that that aligns like with your productivity. So if there is a 0.01% chance that you will get hacked through that area, but it causes your workers to have 20% loss in productivity, do risk acceptance on that and potentially change what you're going to do, whether it's, okay, we're not going to make this multi-factor, we're not going to have 3 jump servers that you have to go through, let's just set up logging on that. So kind of trying to take multiple approaches to get to the same solution, but having that level of acceptance in your risk of this is very, very, very low vulnerability. Where does our acceptance lie in the procedures that we are going to do?
Perfect, Sean.
So I'll just make a comment on this. This is going to shine. This process of implementing these processes are going to shine a light on your corporate culture. How do you go about implementing change in your organization already? Because when you try, if you try to impose and you have a consultative structure beneath you, undergirding how you've done it in the past, then you're in contravention of the culture of your organization. So you really got to do a cultural analysis. How have we done it in the past? and how we built a culture of acceptance of change, and then build off of that. I would suggest we've seen this done very, very poorly, and we've seen this done very, very well. And when it's done poorly, we get reports back. We've implemented all the changes, and then a huge breach happens. Well, you didn't. Implementation is really, really key, and it's got to be culturally aligned with what your company has already done and taught your people. This is how we implement change. So it's really important. It's a great comment.
Good, thank you. All right, so Jason, question. With malicious emails, what sort of best practices are there to help educate users or prevent issues if a malicious link is clicked or a malicious portal logged into? Are there good educational programs or companies that have some proven results with users that might have difficulty with this? Mike, I think maybe this is a good one for you to start with, and then I'll circle back to Sean.
Yeah, there's a variety of, I'll call it phishing cybersecurity training platforms out there in the market. We provide them at TLC Solutions as well. We have one that we've aligned with. So best practices are there to help educate users. I think first and foremost, having the training set up for your team is one. Sharing examples is another. They may not be part of your training. They may just be part of what your IT team shares. Lots of manufacturing companies does shop talks or safety talks, daily stand-ups, things like that. How can you bring that culture of sharing IT attempts or malicious attempts to your business, whether it's at a huddle, a quarterly get-together, a quarterly huddle, town hall, something like that, but continuously finding ways to share these examples with the team so they understand what the possibilities are, because they can look pretty convincing. So the education, there's so many tools out there. I hesitate recommending a specific one, but there are many tools out there on training and prevention.
Yeah, Sean?
This is where cyber insurance can add value. Depending on the cyber insurance you buy, they will include cyber training, pen testing, malicious email tests. They will do it all built in. I don't mean to undercut you, Mike. Please sell your solution. But the insurers, depending on which one you're with, they will provide that as a service built into the premium you pay.
Kenzie?
I'm going to just say two things. One that Sean just said, pen test. If everybody doesn't know, a penetration test, you can hire people to come in and they will basically do a cyber attack on your company. And then you can break it through layers. So generally, like in 30 seconds, they'll start by whether it's physically on your property. That's how most of them start. They'll be physically on your property, try and get into the first layer. If they can't get in, then you will let them into the next layer, and then they will try and hack and so forth until you get to your bottom layer. And then they'll give you a report of a vulnerability test. So they'll highlight every vulnerability that they found. On two fronts, you generally have logging going on. So you watch them go through your network where they're accessing, and then they'll give you a report as well so that you can fix all your vulnerabilities after. Lots of companies do this, so there's a ton on the market, and it's becoming more and more. So that's one. The second thing, so for malicious emails, you having like a fire drill. So actually sending a drilled phishing email and recording who clicks on it and who doesn't, and then providing that training back to your employees. That is a very simple one. It's kind of plays onto the embarrassment factor when you click on a link and it goes, ha, gotcha, and there's no harm done. So having those built into your company is a really good thing for kind of highlighting those phishing and what they should look like.
I'm just going to say I fell for one.
I think we all have.
Christoph?
This is such an interesting question because honestly, phishing is still one of the ongoing biggest cybersecurity threats out there. My opinion on this is that training is not enough, and it's never going to be enough. And with the improvements in generative AI, there will be emails that are generated and sent around that even with the best of training, people will still click. So my recommendation around this would be to actually change policy within the business away from sharing links and documents through email internally. So there are plenty of alternative tools that can be used, such as Microsoft Teams, or there's lots out there that teams can use internally for corresponding, for sharing information, sharing links that are internally more secure because the outside world can't send information into them. And I think prioritizing those in your business early on and moving away from email as much as possible is a good idea. And secondly, so once you've done this, then if you receive an email from your boss that says click on this link, you can safely ignore it. You can assume it's a phishing email. Then beyond that, if you receive links from the outside world, follow up with the person who sent the link. I don't just reply to the message, but actually email them directly and ask them, if necessary, was this actually intentional, or ask it to be sent through another means, give them a call, which I think was mentioned earlier as well. But I think a lot of phishing emails can be stopped with some training, but also policy shift away from internal correspondence through email.
Excellent, thank you. Another question from Sandy. Oh, this will be a good one because I don't know what the acronym means. Is SIEM appropriate for every size organization? If not, at what size does it start becoming appropriate? I hope one of you knows what SIEM means. I hope all of you know what it means, actually. But
I think it has to do around management of security protocols, the management or the tool like MDR, managed detection and response, as a antivirus tool. So there's different levels of antivirus tools that are in the market. Does your company have those different levels? Does the consultant that you're working with offer various levels of security tools, from a basic antivirus to an endpoint detection and response to a managed detection and response platform? We have all three at TLC Solutions. Is that MDR going to be appropriate to every single business? Potentially not. I think it was Kenzie who said earlier, what is the vulnerability? Do you need managed detection and response? I could probably argue every business should have it, but do they need it? Potentially not. And that's where you have to work with your IT team or your third-party consultant to really understand what is the best fit for an antivirus tool in your business. I hope that answers that question.
yeah, this circles back to that chart that Christoph showed with the one graph going up showing that you had when you had a detection, how do you prevent it becoming a major breach? It sounds like that's what SIEM is supposed to prevent, is when you've had the the failure, how do you compensate for that failure to make sure it doesn't become a major breach? Do you have any thoughts on that, Christoph, in terms of specifically the size of company where this becomes a factor? Was where the question started.
I don't think it's a question of size. I think answering this question is actually very complex, and I think you need to have a very knowledgeable consultant provide guidance on how to best solve this, and a really good, detailed, in-depth conversation about context, business practices, and processes. And there are some companies that may be quite sizable that need very little network security because the types of technology they're using end at Microsoft Office. Then there are other companies that have OT networks, lots of moving pieces, especially in manufacturing, where a much more detailed, thorough security solution is required. So I'll stress what I mentioned in my presentation, and that is that context matters. There's no one size fits all solution, but unfortunately, I can't be specific and answer this question without a whole lot more detail about what business you have in mind.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I'm short of questions at the minute. And fortunately, we prepared a few in advance. And one that maybe all of you could answer kind of in turn. And
I'll just
you mentioned.
We have one from Jeff.
Go ahead. Oh,
Jeff has a question.
There we go. Jeff's got another question. Go ahead, Jeff.
I guess a comment and a question. So first comment is cybercrime is regarded as the third largest economy after US and China, in case people weren't aware of that. So it is a pretty crazy landscape. But my question was on always on VPN. I don't know if you guys deal with that much, or I know for remote users that there's a capabilities of having laptops be, when you connect to Wi-Fi, the first thing it does is connect the VPN first before you can actually do anything. Is that something you guys are seeing people adopt a lot? I know there's a bit of an extra pain factor for users at times, but it is also a way to force all communication to go through your firewalls, and hopefully if you have good policies at work, it will slow down the connection arguably a bit, but it can actually help protect the device all the time, as opposed to being on free Wi-Fi, getting a malware on it, then also coming onto your network and bringing it on, right? So questions or comments? Thanks.
Go ahead,
As a
pick on somebody,
developer?
Kenzie.
I do not mind VPNs. I think they're one thing where I'm just like, I will do it always. It's not that much of an inconvenience to connect onto one for the benefit that it actually provides in the cybersecurity realm. Like I said, it's for best practices, you need to have some. That is a very, very small productivity loss connecting onto your VPN than compared to the benefit it provides.
Thanks, Kenzie. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to go around the panel, because one of the things we can always learn from is examples. So in particular, examples of security breaches. Mike had some in his actual presentation. You've each kind of referenced some. Do you have any more examples that manufacturers can learn from of of a breach that that's kind of hit someone? So Mike's got his hand up first, so I'll go with Mike first, and then kind of go around my screen.
Yeah, the one that was, I would say, particularly scary, a company that I know of shall remain nameless. They had decent infrastructure in place for cybersecurity, but somebody had gotten in and they had learned a supplier. They had seen invoices, they copied invoices, they spoofed emails. They sent a message, they sent an email to the finance team at this particular company saying, hey, here's our latest invoice. By the way, we changed our banking information. Please note it on the bottom of the invoice. If you could pay this invoice in the next X amount of days. Finance went ahead and paid the invoice. Lo and behold, that bank account was not a legit bank account, and they were out hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the attack maybe isn't click a link. You could have a very I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say professional because that gives it
Sophisticated.
Shouldn't have. Sophisticated is a much better word, but as a sophisticated attack just to get money out, got into the system, learned suppliers, sent something that looked absolutely legit, and the company was out hundreds of thousands. So an example of how complex it can be.
Sean.
I have hundreds of examples, but I'll pick one. So it's a medical research lab that is developing a drug. They are an independent lab, and they developed the drug themselves. They were ransomed. The ransom required them to pay, or they would not release the data, they would destroy the data. And as a result of not paying, they destroyed the data. And we are now 2.5 years after, and they're still trying to rebuild their data and rebuild their research as a result of a ransomware attack. How's that?
Thanks. Kenzie.
So I'm going to take a kind of what I touched on about segmentation of your network. So like I said previously, not manufacturing. This is from my mining days, but making sure that you know your OEM security as well. So I worked on primarily the autonomous fleet. There is multiple OEMs for that, so I'm going to keep what one was nameless, but I was working in and connecting into the CAN bus on the engine. I actually managed to get back through their network, and I actually could access their entire global fleet from that OEM. So not just the company that I was working for, but every mining company that carried one of those pieces of equipment, I was able to access. And it was very quick. I think it was within an hour and I had access to every fleet. So making sure that one, your security hygiene is very, very strong, but also your OEMs as well. So monitoring how they're connecting to your equipment, what they actually have access to, and monitoring when they're actually working on your equipment, what that looks like. Because you can have those threats where they'll go in through a different company, they'll go back to the main OEM, and then can penetrate down to any company that has given them access levels. So making sure that you are renewing their passwords as well if they have accounts to access your stuff, making sure that they're having your company's best practices as well.
Well, that circles back to your segmentation piece too, right? Christoph, any examples?
Sure. Yes, I've certainly been exposed to a few. So I again will also not mention the name of the company, but they spun up a factory in India to mass produce a new product. The push to get the product out the door was such that they didn't bother with all the appropriate cybersecurity protocols at the new location, which is always a risk and not that uncommon. One of the employees there, they were just using off-the-shelf laptops for programming USB keys for customers, brought in a virus from home, which was installed in the laptop, and then they continued to use that laptop to program all the USB keys sent out to customers from that same laptop, and wound up sending out thousands and thousands of virused USB keys to customers around the globe. This was an international company that got a lot of media attention and was quite a black eye for the business. And again, it was one person making a mistake in India for a new factory, and they just hadn't had that training, they hadn't had that engagement, and they hadn't had those security measures put in place all to get the product out the door a little bit faster. So it's trade-offs.
And I know of one of our members who, interestingly, they got hit by a ransomware attack, and they were able to go to their legacy paper systems and were up and running within hours on their legacy paper systems, which is pretty awesome that they were able to do that. That they kept those legacy paper systems in place, or at least in place enough to be activated relatively quickly. I don't know which order you guys popped up. So Mike, then Sean.
One really quick example, it doesn't always have to be an external threat actor. And an example I know from a fairly large organization, somebody was terminated. So this goes back to employee decommissioning steps. Before that employee was actually exited and their system was locked out, they had the ability to forward an email, a company email to themselves. And then they used that for some not legal practices, really robbing, stealing from the business. So those employee decommissioning steps, you got to protect yourself from within as well. How are you making sure that that employee, once they are exited from the business, fired, terminated, that their system is locked down? Because if it isn't done instantly, they now may have a bone to pick, especially if they're let go for performance or non-positive reasons in that employee's eyes. Got to lock it down. So locking down the system for employee decommissioning is critical.
Especially if your employee can access every mining fleet in the world. Sean.
Yeah, this is for Kenzie, actually. One is a comment and the second is a question. First is a comment. You are extraordinarily talented, which makes you terrifying, by the way. So nobody on the call, give her your home address. Do not do it. And then the question is, Kenzie, when it comes to segmentation, we've had situations that I've seen where segmentation was in place. But with time, worms made their way in through the segmented walls. Any comment on that? I've got 3 or 4 claims I'm thinking of right now where it infected every segmented compartment in the company's infrastructure.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the big ones is that's a pain in the ass for a developer, but it is a really good measure, is having separate accounts for separate layers. So for your operational technology layer, having an operational technology admin account. And so those accounts, if your regular account that is exposed to the outside world is compromised, it can't get into that layer. And that's where I have seen, especially with going through penetration tests on both sides, on the defense side and the actual penetration side. That has been the biggest thing. So kind of worming my way into using somebody's account that's exposed to the outer web, getting in and then getting into the operational technology layer and not having that differentiation, but having separate accounts and then having those operational technology accounts really locked down. So having a very, very strong lockdown on those accounts where they can't access the internet. They can't do a lot of the things that your other account can. Yes, it adds a layer of complexity to your developers, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to have some acceptance of it. And I have had the unfortunate experience of a team member being terminated and their account not terminated, and our entire team got hacked. So everybody that was on this person's direct team, all of our information was distributed. And it lost our team almost 3 weeks before anybody on our direct team could actually access a computer. So it was great. I was working 70-hour weeks and went to not being able to access anything. So basically a 3-week vacation, but it's those little things where you can implement that might take up 5 minutes to add another account in that layer. But especially as we see more cobots come into manufacturing, where you're having a worker and a robot working hand in hand in a cell. I work primarily with welding equipment, so that is a big factor when you have robots and humans working together. There is a safety component there. So for me, I love my crew. They're great. They're a great crew to work with. I want to protect them physically as well. So taking those 2 extra minutes to add another account or go through a layer of your network, it's a culture shift. But like I said, as a developer, there's making sure that the guys out there are safe is 2 minutes. That's an acceptance that I can have. I think that answered.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks, Kenzie. All right, so we are now at 11:53. So we're going to start wrapping this up. I'm going to put a survey link up on the screen in a moment, but first I just want to thank our 4 participants. I learned a ton from this. I think the key messages that I got were that the human factor is still the most important factor, and that cybersecurity isn't something you bolt onto the outside of your business. It's not like putting in, a wall around your house. It's something you have to integrate into it, and it has to understand your business. So, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation.